This is Kyle Laster with Centerfin Capital, and this is our collective weekly for the week ending March 22nd, 2024. This week, we'll be discussing the stock market going to all-time highs on the back of a Fed decision, NVIDIA releasing the next generation of chips, and then the Department of Justice launching a big antitrust lawsuit versus Apple. Starting with the markets, if you've been following the news, stock markets hit all-time highs. All the major averages, the Dow Jones, the NASDAQ, and the S&P 500 reached all-time highs on Wednesday after the Federal Reserve met and decided they were not going to cut interest rates, but they indicated that they still see 3 cuts in the year to come. Now, this was important because the market was somewhat concerned that the Fed might indicate that they would cut less than 3 times. People were worried that they would say they would only cut 2 times. They reiterated that they see 3 cuts for the year. The markets rallied on the back of that news. Now, our view is that the number of cuts is less important, whether it's 3 cuts or 2 cuts, versus the actual overall direction of future interest rates. The Federal Reserve in December told us that interest rates are going lower. They basically reiterated this week. And we think that's definitely a positive for the stock market. It's a tailwind. As everybody knows, the stock market is really the present value of the future cash flows of the companies that trade in the stock market. And so lower interest rates bring up the present value of those, meaning higher valuations. We also think that if the Fed continues on this path, it will continue to be positive for stocks, especially spreading to other parts of the market that have not followed the broader markets higher. For instance, the Russell 2000, while it rallied this week, is still below all-time highs. We think that if nothing changes, this should give energy for those parts of the stock market that have not rallied to catch up with the rest of the market. Next, we have NVIDIA releasing their next generation of chips for artificial intelligence, for large language models. They released the Blackwell B200, which is basically the next generation of the H100, which was used to power the training of the ChatGPT, Claude, and Gemini language learning models. The B200 is said to be 4 times more effective in training LLMs. So you needed something like 8,000 H100s to train ChatGPT-4. You'll only need 2,000 of the B200s. They also announced server infrastructure, the GB200, which basically is 30x the power of being able to run these large language learning models. The large language learning models, running them different from training, takes a lot of compute. NVIDIA is on top of that. NVIDIA announced is that they're working on chips that will power large language models used for humanoid robots. NVIDIA continues to be a leader and stay ahead of the market. As we've discussed before, every company out there has an AI strategy, and NVIDIA has been a step ahead in terms of developing the technology they need to be able to build these models. As long as everybody's working on AI strategy and developing new use cases for large language models, they will need chips from NVIDIA, and NVIDIA continues to innovate and think one step ahead of the market and provide that compute that we will need in order to run these large language models. Last but not least, we have the Department of Justice launching a massive antitrust case versus Apple this week, along with a number of state attorney generals. This was a big thing. The government argues that Apple stifles competition, box out competitors, they keep prices artificially high for consumers, argued that their ecosystem extracts value from everybody that uses it, including the end consumer, creators, developers, companies that use them. It really reminds us of the 1998 case against Microsoft, where the government launched a massive antitrust case against Microsoft. That led to a decade of distractions and headwinds for Microsoft. In that space of time, Microsoft failed to innovate. They missed a lot of trends, including the cloud and mobile. Their stock price was pretty stagnant. As Mark Twain says, history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. We certainly have to think that there are some parallels between Microsoft in the early 2000s and what Apple is about to go through right now. Apple will argue, rightfully, that they build beautiful products and focus on customer experience and user experience, and that they need to control the ecosystem in order to be able to do so. But they're still going to have to fight with the government. We do think that it will stifle innovation, at least it will distract from innovation. As an example of that, there's been lots of arguments that they're behind on their AI strategy, and this week they announced that they're talking to Google about using their Gemini LLMs to use as their large language models, and we think that's an example of that. Thank you for listening. Please reach out with any questions or comments. Also, let us know. We had a lot of comments last week about topics that you guys would like to hear about. So let us know, drop it in the comments. We're happy to talk more about specific stocks. Obviously, none of this is investment advice. We're also happy to discuss broader markets, the crypto markets, inflation, interest rates, and anything else that's on your mind. Thanks and have a good weekend.